my grandparents, James Inglefield and Mary Inglefield, and I'm going to be interviewing them about World War II. Now these questions are going to be about you. How old were you during World War II?
We were in our 30s, Alex.
Where and when were you born?
Mary, when were you born?
1908.
Where?
Where? West Middlesex.
What day?
April 25th.
I was born in Duquesne, Pennsylvania, October the 4th, 1907, which makes us just 6 months apart.
Where did you live?
Well, that's a kind of a hard question, Alex, because we were school teachers and moved around a lot, but we did have several residences in West Middlesex, in Connet, Ohio, in Dorset, Ohio, in Huber Heights, Ohio, in Lafayette, Indiana, in Naperville, Illinois, and
They wouldn't be permanent.
there were summer school places to live.
What jobs did your parents have?
My father was a steel maker, worked at a steel mill in Duquesne.
Grandma? What
And
jobs
my-
did your parents have?
My father was mostly a farmer,
You know.
but he also worked in town, and when he needed to, he'd work in mills. Papa was a strong man.
He was an iron worker. He was a blacksmith, and he could make any kind of a shape that you ever wanted. He was very good at it.
What jobs did you have?
Well, I was a school teacher teaching science, chemistry, and physics.
What jobs did you have, Grandma?
What? I didn't get that.
What jobs did you have?
What did you teach, or what did you do?
Oh, I taught different things, but mostly English related. Grammar.
And she's still teaching me grammar too.
Yes, and history. In fact, you just had to be able to do different things.
How many children were in your family?
Just my brother and I and our family.
There were 3 in mine, but one died. My oldest sister died when she was 12. And it's a terrible thing.
Did anyone else live in your house?
What?
Did anyone else live in your house?
Your grandmother lived with you in the wintertime, like my grandfather lived at our house in the wintertime.
Sometimes.
Yes. It all depended upon what the need was at the time.
Yes. But they were welcome at any time.
Now I'm going to ask you some questions about the war. How did you receive news about the war?
We received it by radio, by newspaper, and by telephone.
How
I
did-
heard President Roosevelt tell about the invasion by the Japanese in the Pearl Harbor, and what a terrible thing he said it was.
How did your family life change during the war?
Well, truly, there wasn't a great deal of change except for one thing. We were rationed on tires and rubber, and that cut back a lot of the traveling we would have done at the time. And there were other things that were rationed too. There were too many of them to try to remember them all.
Did your daily routine change during the war?
I did hear that.
Did your daily routine change during the war?
I didn't hear that, Alex.
Did your daily routine change during the war?
Oh, no. We lived our ordinary life, except in being a school teacher. I had 3 months in the summer, and I worked in the mill. Mary was a housewife then.
Did you have to give up anything during the war?
Well, now there's a funny thing, Alex. Necessity is the mother of invention. And when the rubber was shut off from the islands by the war, someone invented synthetic rubber. When the silk was shut off from China during the war, someone invented nylon and Dacron. And you can see how important they were when we use so much of it today. When the steel business was working on the war effort, someone invented plastic, which is a substance that can be
It's synthetic too.
molded into shape, and then, depending upon the plastic, some of it would solidify as hard as steel, and they use it in the making of cars. And some of it was flexible, and they use it for packaging things. I know because during the war we ran out of butter, and we had to buy margarine. Someone invented margarine, which is a non-dairy product, and it was packaged in plastic bags, and it looked like lard, and was very unappetizing, except that they put a little yellow capsule in the package that you had to squeeze and make the oleo look like butter. Now today you can hardly buy butter. It's all margarine now. But the strange part of it is they don't call it margarine. They just call it a spread, non-dairy spread.
Grandma, did any of your family members fight in the war?
Did any of your family fight in the war?
No.
Now Leonard, her brother,
He enlisted, but the war was over before they
No.
called him. What?
he had that X-ray taken of him, and they had a spot on his lung.
Yes.
He became a 4F.
They found a
Spot on his lung.
spot on his lung.
Did any of your family members fight in the war?
I had a nephew who didn't do any fighting. He did a lot of training being a doctor. He was stationed in Texas and stationed in Hawaii. He later became a doctor.
What did you fear most during the war?
Well, due to the fact that the United States is protected on the west by the Pacific Ocean and on the east by the Atlantic Ocean, we weren't really afraid of an invasion as it would be if we were in Europe. But later on, Alex, I know it wasn't during World War II, but when the Cold War came on, everybody was asked to build a bomb shelter and stock it with the necessary things for protection.
Were you enthusiastic about the war, or did you think that it was pointless?
Well, we were indifferent about the war, Alex. That is, it didn't really affect our lives very much. Just those things that we were rationed with.
Jim, I wouldn't say we were indifferent, but it was different if you had a brother in a war or a son.
Well,
And since we didn't,
well, that's why I said what I did, because we didn't have anybody participating.
that's right.
We were out of it as far as taking part in the actual war.
And we noticed one thing, there was more money.
Well, everybody was working then.
And wages went up.
Now, if Leonard had gone to war and was in battles, we would have been more concerned. And if Dr. Joe had been in an actual fighting, we would have been more concerned. But since neither one of them actually fought, we weren't that too much worried.
Is there anything that you think people who didn't live through World War II should know?
Well, I think they should get behind the effort. If there is another war, they should do like Rosie the Riveter did. Go to work in the mills and work in the war effort.
You do whatever you have to do.
Yeah.
What's your most significant memory from the war?
Well, I can remember them selling Liberty bonds on the street corners where prominent people would have a crowd around them. They're selling bonds. Then in the summer, I worked in a mill on tanks that were used during the war.
Did you build the tanks, or did you just build the tank parts?
We just worked on the tank parts. They assembled them. Chrysler, I think, assembled them in could be Detroit. I don't know exactly where.
What's your most significant memory from the war, Grandma?
Well, I'm a sympathetic person, and I felt for people who were suffering, like the Elliots, who were our neighbors, our next close neighbors, and they had a son who was missing, and we all just felt as though he was ours. He didn't come back. He was killed. And they did get a lot of money, the Elliots, but money doesn't take the place of a person.
What did you learn from the war?
Stay out of a war. Don't get into one.
Well, I would say a war never solved anything.
It causes problems.
If you follow the following years after World War II, there were a number of wars fought. And so the problems presented by a war are very seldom solved by the war.
What did you do for entertainment during World War II?
Well, we watched movies and listened to radio and
You talked a lot on the telephone.
yes, and went to dances. There were two radio shows. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the time on this, but Sing Along with Mitch Miller was a very, I think it was by Firestone, Lucky Strike cigarettes. I think they were the ones that sponsored it. And the other one was Amos and Andy.
Oh, yes. They were comedians.
They were comedians at 7 o'clock of an evening. Now, I don't know whether it's every night or certain nights of the week. But meetings in those towns were not held till after Amos and Andy were over with, because everybody was listening to Amos and Andy.
At least a lot of people, Jim.
Well, I wouldn't be afraid to say that most of them were.
Were many of those things that you did during World War II very different from the things that you did before and after World War II?
No, because we had radio before. We had radio. Oh, the only thing is we have television now. We didn't have that then.
How did transportation change during the war?
Well, the rationing caused people to be very conservative in their driving, tires and rubber, and then the carpools started then. And I have a feeling that the vans that we have today, the family vans where you have the family riding in a van, started then when people bought vans to haul local people to work so that they wouldn't have to drive so much.
What did the people around you do to help the war effort?
Well, they sold Liberty bonds, or they rather bought Liberty bonds, and they were asked, the women were asked to give up their aluminum kitchen utensils to be used, melted down and used to build airplanes. And they gave up their aluminum cooking utensils.
What were those Liberty bonds?
Beg your pardon?
What were the Liberty bonds?
Oh, they were bonds used to help pay for the war. Today we call them E-bonds or EE bonds. They were called Liberty bonds then and Victory bonds.
Are they mature yet?
Yes, they've ceased making interest. The other thing was they made it possible for you to take it out of your pay. You didn't have to have the cash at the time. You could pay for it monthly by taking it out of your pay.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you some questions about the 1940s. What were some of the popular foods during the 1940s?
Well, I think the food was just as popular then as it is today. Meat and potatoes. Oh, I believe. Would pasta start coming, spaghetti, and those things start coming then or not? I don't know when they started to be popular. Pizzas, but they came later, Alex.
What were some of the fads and fashions in the 1940s?
Well, men wore knickers. Now, when they started that, I don't know the exact time, but they wore knickers, which were knee-length pants, and they wore very loud colored argyle stockings. And they used them for the most part on golf courses, but they went from the golf courses out onto the street.
Grandma, do you remember how the women dressed?
It seems to me that they wore short skirts for a while.
I believe you're
Saved.
right. Yeah.
Saved
Material.
material.
Short skirts.
Very short, in fact, up over the knees.
I don't think women started to wear trousers. Well, they could have because
call them pants,
when the women started working in the mills,
Yes.
it could be that they wore the trousers out on the street somewhere around that particular time.
What kinds of music were popular in the 1940s?
Jazz.
Swing.
Who do you think played the best music?
Wayne King.
Your taste. It depended on what you liked.
They asked what were the orchestras that played good music then? The Dorsey Brothers.
I can't tell you.
You know, it's strange, your memory, even though Barry went to a lot of dances, he was a popular form of entertainment at the time.
Do you remember any of the popular toys from the 1940s?
Well, they had roller skates, they had ice skates, they had sleds, they had wagons. It was the beginning of the plastic toys.
Because of the rationing?
Beg your pardon?
Because of the rationing?
Rationing.
Was there more plastic because they were rationing the metal?
Well, that could be the reason. The metal was short and they quit making things with metal. I think the only thing you can find in metal today is these little cars. Aren't they made of metal today?
Yeah.
The bigger ones is it Tonka?
Yeah, those are made of plastic.
They're all made of plastic. I think it was the beginning of the plastic here, and wooden. They made a lot of wooden toys then too.
Yeah.
Tinker
There's
Toy.
not that many wooden toys anymore now, though.
Tinker toys
Yeah.
were always a popular toy. Then came the Lincoln Logs. When they started, I don't know.
What were some of the popular books in the 1940s?
Well,
I can't answer.
chemistry and physics books for me, but Zane Grey was popular, has been popular all along. Other Western authors and romance novels, whatever they were at that particular time.
Your taste would determine, wouldn't it?
Romance novels of
What did you do for fun?
play Chinese checkers. No, we went to movies and we listened to radio. As I said before, those two shows, Mitch Miller and his sing-alongs and Amos and Andy. There were other shows that were popular at the time that people watched. Dancing.
Okay, that's the end of the interview.
Well, thank you, Alex, for
Yes.
giving us an opportunity to help you.
Yes. Forgotten, I find you forget.
The thing that I feel about this is now after you're gone and the interview is over with, we'll remember a lot of the things we should have said when we talked to you. Because that's the way memories are.
They have to be jogged.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to tell me about this period?
Well, yes, as I said, you call things back. Plastic is a name that applies to a whole lot of products that can be
They're synthetic.
finished into a form different than it starts out to be. And it's a synthetic material, and they have it now that you, saran wrap is one. It didn't come right away, it was developed later. Ford Motor Company said, I believe it was Ford Motor, they were gonna build their fenders out of corn stalks. And butter ran out in the rationing, and they made oleomargarine, but they don't call it oleomargarine anymore. They call it non-dairy spread. Promise, Fleischmann's, some of the other Parquet, and then
Some people prefer it to butter.
Yeah. Where I was living at the time before we were married, the landlady came in to the dining room and said, here's the new shortening I'm going to make the pies with from now on. And it was Crisco, the substitute for lard. You see, before the war, the only two kinds of shortenings there were was animal fat and butter. Those two things. Lard and bacon fat. Those were the two. So now you have the non-dairy products, Crisco and that, and vegetable oil. They all came since the war, and they were put in plastic bottles. You don't see any glass bottles anymore. They're all plastic, and that all came as a result of the war. remember this, Alex, as terrible as war is, something good comes out of it. No matter how bad it was. We get good things and use them since the war. That's a peculiar thing to say, but it's the truth. We are using things that they never dreamed of before the war. But because it was needed, someone made it. My father had appendicitis, and it burst, and peritonitis set in. And he wasn't expected to live until they gave him a medicine that was invented during the war to take care of gunshot wounds. And it saved his life. So medicine has changed as a result of the war. I don't think many doctors today prescribe liquid medicines. They're all pill poppers now. But those things that you think of,
They're easy.
they're easy to take and easy to store. But I guess that's,
Well, thanks for letting me interview you about World War II.
well, we're glad we could help. Wish we could do more.